Good morning, everyone. Please take your seats. We'd like to get started. We're running a few minutes behind schedule. Welcome to UNM and to the Anderson School of Management. I've always appreciated the British. They have a great sense of humor, and they really know how to make fun of themselves. And I think this is the equivalent of the American analog. And this was a cartoon by Mike Lukovich, who operates the Atlanta Journal. He's a Pulitzer Prize-winning cartoonist. And the cartoon starts with, "Future AIG executive. Is now a good time to discuss upping my allowance?" Great cartoon, and I encourage you to visit his website. It's got great stuff. Well, before I turn it over to Dean Brown, I'd like to again welcome you all. I will ask you to put your cell phones, if you haven't already, on vibrate. Today we have a serious topic from a serious man, and to introduce our speaker today is our Dean Doug Brown. But before we do that, I'd just like to get a sense of how many of you are here for the first time. Wow. Well, welcome. Welcome to the UNM community, and welcome to the Anderson School of Management. Well, without further ado, I'd like to introduce the Dean of the Anderson School, Douglas M. Brown.
Thank you, Ernest. And as usual, the way things happen, I mean, the chairs arrive, and these stanchions are here, and the TV works, and this works, and so on, as do people like Ernest and Natalie, Laura, and Roxanne. And let's give them a hand. I'm sorry that George and Sibylla Borrichter aren't here. There was a really nice little piece done by Wynne Quigley in the Journal earlier this week on George and Sibylla, who are transplants, as many of you and I have been over the years, who came to this town and started putting a lot into it. And among the things that George has done is he and Sibylla have sponsored this series with their generosity, and I'm sorry they can't be here. A couple other people to particularly acknowledge. We've got Regent Don Chalmers with us here today. Thank you, Don. And I see sneaking in John Garcia, who runs things for the city and who also has quite a message on economic development. And we have among us a number of UNM Foundation members, some Anderson Foundation board members, and Anderson Alumni Council. Will all of you please stand and be recognized? Well, it's a real pleasure to be able to introduce Mark. As with so many of our personal and social friends over the years, we met them through our kids. You know, kids' activities, you're standing on the soccer field, or your kids are in class. In this case, Megan Lautman and our son Joe were classmates in school for 7 years at the academy, and it was the first time we met Mark. But by reputation, had come to know him because he is the one who really built Rio Rancho. And Rio Rancho was for a while the fastest growing city in the entire United States. And it was his energy, his vision, his initiative, determination that made that happen. And he went on from there to build, to really help create and boost Santa Teresa and the whole border crossing development. Then lent a shoulder to Mesa del Sol. And from there, he's gone now into his community economics lab, consults with a number of cities, not just in New Mexico, but really all over the country and the world. And in particular, Ernest and I were up in Farmington working with some of the oil and gas people there. And suddenly, just out of nothing, they just broke into this praise for Mark Lautman. We got this fellow from Albuquerque, Rio Rancho, who is just really setting us on the right track economically. We thought that alone was, you know, a tribute. Mark's background, of course, he's a Lobo from University of New Mexico, an economics graduate. And this says a lot: economics, architecture, and geography. I mean, this is this multifaceted, broad-scale, macro approach that shows up in his book, which is called When the Boomers Bail. And I hope you'll stick around and get a copy later, and Mark can autograph it from you. It's $14. And it really captures, I think, a very compelling and important theme of how some of the demographics will overlie our economic development efforts. Well, if we ever needed to learn about economic development, it's now. And so let's hear it from Mark Lautman. Mark.
It's on? Okay. Yeah, we're dealing with some pretty wicked problems. That's what the Sandians call problems that are so complex you can't really understand them, and so threatening they threaten to overturn our present view of the world. Jeff Bezos says whenever you're confronting a problem, the first thing you should do is get a firm grip on the obvious. And that's hard to do. It's been hard to do since 2007. Our friends at Sandia, in particular, Bill Knopf and Jerry Jonas, when they're looking at these big, what they call autocatalytic, self-adapting complex systems, they say you have to embrace the wickedness of the problem before you can start working on it. So I have two goals this morning. One is to get you to embrace the wickedness of what we're confronting, and it's scary and painful, and it's not very much fun to dwell on, but I want to try to get through that quickly. And then I'm going to talk about what I think is going to be the greatest period of innovation in the economic development business we've seen since the business started 50 years ago in Tupelo, Mississippi, where the community lost a couple of plants and started sending salespeople for the community up to Chicago to find new plants. But whenever you start out to try to do something you're not sure you can do, like turn the economy around, turn the economy of your community around, it's important to have a system or a process to follow. And when I was in Santa Teresa, our company decided to adopt a middle school in La Union, New Mexico, which is a colonia. And most of the children in this school were from second generation or first generation Mexican immigrant families, and English was a second language for most of them. And we had sat down with the principal, and we're trying to figure out how do you double the number of honor students in this that are coming out of this cohort of kids. In the first year, we said anybody that's in honors and can get a friend next year into the honors program, we'll take you to Disneyland. And we did the math, and it probably wasn't going to be more than one bus, $3,000. Got somebody to donate the rooms. So we did the Disneyland trip, and then the next year we started thinking about what's the next thing we could do. We decided to try and teach goal setting. So, hey Jim Smith and I had been coaching swimming back in the day in Phoenix, and we'd actually brought in twice a year a group called the Pacific Institute that were kind of the advent of Stephen Covey and the self-improvement industry, and actually put all the swimmers and the parents and the coaches of this team. We had about 1,000 kids in the water in the summer and a couple, 200-300 in the winter. We put them through a 3-day seminar on how the brain worked, how goal setting works, and taught it like a class and made everybody set goals. And we did it twice a year to great success. And the way the goal setting thing works is, first of all, you have to believe that you have some influence over how your life's going to turn out. Yeah, so if you think everything's just a matter of chance, you're not going to think about the future. If you don't think about the future, if you don't log some serious time thinking about it, you never really learn to care about it. If you don't care about it, you never hatch a plan. You never invest in a plan. And so when something good does happen to you, you have no rationale for taking credit for it. And that just reinforces it was just luck. Good luck or bad luck. And so that just reinforces the notion that you didn't have anything to do with it. And that you really don't have any control. And in the middle of this goal-setting curriculum, we took the program that Jim and I were running for our swimming program, and I kind of remodeled it for 5th, 6th, 7th graders. And after 3 weeks, none of it was taking. None of it. And we said, look, you know, lots of people set out to try to do things they're not sure they can do. And this is how you do it. Here's the rules, here's the process, here's how you do it. It's just blank stares from everybody. And it was a conversation with the parish priest that informed me that, look, you got a different mentality here. These people have nobody that they imprint on in their lives have ever had a successful goal-setting experience in their lives. And so if you have, by the time you're 24 years old, if you haven't set out to do something you don't think you could do, and got some help, set up a plan, got some help, use some of your discretionary resources to do it, and achieve the goal, then you don't know that process is available. It's like you don't have that intellectual infrastructure. You don't have the brain app to goal set. And so when I was down there talking to this group of parents, group of kids, they're looking at me, you know, I've got a white shirt and tie on, and I'm driving a nice car, and they're thinking, geez, there's only 3 ways you can become affluent. I wonder which way he got his money. You either inherit it, you steal it, or you win the lottery. But that 4th way does not exist. The intellectual architecture for that thought is not in their heads. I think it's why gambling is such a popular enterprise among the poor. Anyway, fast track another 5-10 years, I start working with communities that are trying to overhaul their economic development programs, and I end up in boardrooms filled with people like you who have all excelled at this personal goal setting thing. So not only do you have the app, but you're operating it at the highest level. You've mastered your profession, you're raising families successfully, you've got a great career, you're a good athlete, you have all these things going that you subconsciously at this point are applying this goal setting app. And yet when you suggest to a board room of community leaders that they have influence, maybe not control, but they have a great amount of influence over how the future economy of the community turns out, they look at you like that class of 5th graders and their parents in Laonion. Are you kidding me? You can't do that. The economy is controlled somebody else. So this whole idea, if you don't believe that you have influence over how your economy turns out, you are in a broken cycle, and you're going to feel helpless, and you're going to be hopeless. And you're going to be just waiting for the next turn of the worm. So what I wanted to do this morning was go through really the 2 sets of factors. One set kind of obvious, there's a set that's not obvious. And these 2 factors completely change the game, the economic development game. That's the Gunson cycle. That's what we call the way you keep things, keep your head in the game and you keep your community focused is believe, think, care. You got to care about it. You plan, invest, and succeed, and then it reinforces the cycle. If it breaks anywhere, you got to go back. Okay, you need a way to think about the economy in a productive way, and it's getting harder because we have more information about it, and it's one of these super complex, self-adapting, autocatalytic systems that Jerry Jonas talks about. And it's too complicated to really comprehend. So you got to have simple models. This is the one we use now. Your economy has to grow faster than the population. If it does, you have more money. Everybody has more money next year than they had the year before per person to serve, and everything's great. If you have less money per person, the economy grows slower than the population, you're in a recession. On the economy side, you have three components. You have the economic base, which is the part of the economy where the products and services produced are sold outside the economy, bringing all the money in. And then you have the service sector, which essentially takes the money that came in and moves it around, and all the goods and services produced in the service sector are sold to other people in the economy. You cannot grow your economy by growing the service economy. Otherwise, you could solve all your unemployment problems by opening up 10,000 laundromats. You gotta grow the economic base, the export part of the program. And that's what economic developers focus on. Now, there's also a factor, pretty important factor, net worth. So if the net worth, if there's a windfall of value in people's homes, that gives them the additional capital to work with, that can help move the economy up or down. If it gets wiped out, that hurts too. But those are the three factors you take into account. On the other side, on the population side, you have dependents, unqualified workers, and qualified workers. I'm going to talk a little bit more about those in a few minutes. So basically, if you lose a chunk of your economic base, so if Intel leaves, you lose a corresponding amount of service jobs, and you lose a visible means of support for the dependents that are dependent on that share of the economy. And you either replace it, or it closes up, your economy gets smaller, your population gets smaller, and people leave. If you want to grow, and normally you're losing some, you have to replace the ones you lost, your economic-based jobs you lost, and you got to add some over time. And that's what the economic development business is. So you need to be mindful of what you lost, and you have to have a plan for what you're going to replace or grow the future economy with. And that's what economic developers do. And most of the time, economic developers, all we had to do was entertain any community or any company that was willing to come to the community and consider building a plan. And you had to take care of the ones that you already had. But it was primarily an east side activity. All we had to do was worry about creating the jobs. There was plenty of workers. There's a couple of trends or sets of trends that make this really problematic now. And one is, and this is one of the obvious ones. Okay, so one is there's been a major change on the economy side, and nobody really wants to believe it, but we are in if you look at how everybody's looking for a V pattern to the economy, where we would have a recession and then we'd bounce back up to where we were in 07 and carry on again, and then we see another recession. And it's not a V, it's an L. And there's lots of reasons for it. I mean, it's what they call a dead cat bounce. So it's an economics term. So, even a dead cat bounces when it hits the pavement. If you throw it off a high enough building. And so you don't want to misconstrue the cat coming back up for the recovery. But anybody today, 3 years ago, different story. We could all hope. Anybody today that thinks this economy is bouncing back anywhere close to where it was in '07 is delusional, in my opinion. We lost about 20% of the, maybe just think about it, we lost 20% of the economy. 20% of the economy was based on consumption, financed by debt, nobody was going to ever pay off. So that's gone. And you got all this excess capacity on the market. Our banks stopped lending, and we're in the process of deleveraging the economy. And you're going to have to grow back with a lot less leverage than we had before. And just problems like the federal government is going to be contracting for the foreseeable future. If you take 8 zeros off the federal government predicament, that was the focus of the effort to get the debt ceiling lifted a month ago. Here's the federal government's predicament. If you take the 8 zeros off and put it in the context of a family budget, you have $21,000 worth of income. You have $38,000 of expenses. So you have a $16,000 gap every year. So you ask your credit card company, would you give me a $16,000 more headroom this coming year so I can keep my family fed? And the credit card company says, well, you've already got $147,000 on the card. We'll give you the $16,000 headroom, but you have to cut your budget by $385. That was, and then they went ballistic because they were going to have to cut their budget by $385. And so anybody that thinks that the federal government is going to solve the problem, the problems we have with a $385 budget cut for the year is crazy. I mean, there's going to be more cuts, and New Mexico is especially vulnerable. So these are all really depressing things to think about, especially when you look at them in the aggregate. And I've been introduced as the Dr. Kevorkian of economic development for talking about this. I'm going to stop talking about it so much because it's starting to become obvious to everybody. And let's talk a little bit about the not obvious part of this, which is this graph, which scared the hell out of me when I first saw it. And what it is, it was a Bureau of Labor Statistics graph that shows the demand for jobs outstripping the workforce. And the lines crossed in 2008. And it's the result of 4 factors. We didn't have enough, we're the first generation in history not to have enough kids to support ourselves, or to replace ourselves. Replacement's 2.1, we're probably at 1.7. You put the immigration and the Hispanic population into the equation and we're 2.3. Actually better than the rest of the industrialized world. But we did not have enough kids to replace ourselves. Everybody you're going to hire in the next 25 years has already been born. And we know who took Algebra 2 and who didn't. There's not enough people. When we start leaving, when us boomers start bailing out of the economy, there's not enough workers with the experience and the education and the wiring to do the work that's going to be required. The economy, the population is not going to shrink with the workforce. It's going to keep growing because we're living longer. And the boomer anomaly is going to hit this decade and most of the following decade. And it changes the game. It changes this economic development game. So everybody, this is a room with a big employer that wants to come to town and the local community, and they're trying to figure out what is this company using as a criteria to take us on or off the list, and how do we convince them that we can that we can, that we're the best place for this company to make it through the next, 10 or 15 years, or the next 3 or 4 business cycles. And the game is going to change. If you don't have the qualified workers, and you can't demonstrate that you can attract them at will and defend them, that company's not coming. And it doesn't matter what kind of other incentives you offer them anymore. So it used to be that the governor and the mayor and the chair of your economic development group and the CEO made the decision on where these jobs went. That's changing. And what you have is a situation where if you look at the population of your community, it's a pie chart. But half on the blue side is your population, your dependents. Up on the upper end is your workers too old to work, and then down at the bottom are too young to work. And then green, you have your qualified workers. That's anybody able to produce 1.5 times the poverty rate. Otherwise, you're probably taking more out of your community economy than you're putting in. And then you have the unqualified class. And what's happening is most communities in the industrialized world are at risk of not having enough qualified workers to staff their economy. And the day you are at full employment of your qualified workers, you are done. There's no more economic development. It's impossible unless you steal talent from someplace else. It changes the economic development game at a fundamental level. The hiring process goes from being driven by and managed by and all the power in the hands of the employer in an oversupply situation like when we boomers hit the market, to one of where the power shifts to the employee, to the worker. The workers have all the power from here on out. And so the decisions for where these jobs are going to go are going to be driven by where the qualified workers want to live, period. This sets up a major problem. There's not enough workers to go around. It creates a zero-sum labor market, which means if you want to grow your company or you want to grow your economy, your community leader, you want to grow your economy a little faster than the population, you have to steal talent from someone else, some other community or some other company, in order to grow. We're past the days when everybody could grow without impacting really anyone else. Now it becomes a more and more vicious, competitive war for talent. And there's going to be winners and losers. And you can there's a lot of work to be done to figure out, try to predict what the DNA of the winners and losers look like, because you're not going to want to go set up a business or move to a place that's heading for Loserville. The really scary thing is when you think about what happens in a community when their economy's growing slower than their population. Serve more people with less money. And you end up with a scenario where you have to defer maintenance on everything. You can't improve anything if you don't have the extra resources. And you can't make the improvements in the community needed to attract and hold on to these workers who can virtually go anywhere now. And once you go into one of these spirals, it's going to be really hard to get out. So here's what we're looking at in a lot of communities. You could say half the communities in the U.S. are going from this, where you're about half workers and most of them in the economy and half dependents, to you're going to have all these retirees, the most productive people in the economy, bailing into the most expensive part of the dependent cohort, and our schools are dumping half of our kids in the unqualified sector. There's also a lot of pressure pushing the unqualified workers in the market into the unqualified sector. So when jobs get more complicated, more complex, more require more education, or they change, that can put a whole cohort of previously qualified, hard-working people in your economy into the unqualified class. There's lots of pressures going on that are causing the proportions to go the opposite of what we want. What you want is the qualified sector to be growing and your young, too young to work cohorts to be growing. They're both shrinking, and the two that you want to shrink are both growing. And they're going to grow. It's going to be explosive. And if you notice, we don't have any data to talk about this, to really focus on. I can't populate this at the local level with numbers. So this is the problem. This is how you should think about the dilemma that community leaders face trying to manage their community economies. Getting to why you should care about it. 3 reasons. First, if you ever read Richard Florida's book, Who is Your City? It's a great book. It's about, basically the thesis is, he builds a pretty strong statistical case for the most important decision you make as a human being that drives your happiness is where you choose to live. It's not what career you decide to take on. It's more important than who you marry. It's where you choose to live. And that's only going to get worse. I mean, that's only going to rise in importance. Because if you choose to live in a community that's incapable of growing its economy faster than its population, you're going to have almost all the quality of life factors under pressure. And I think it's just going to be very difficult for those, once it starts, for communities to reverse those trends in the market we're in. The second issue is really the people that live in our state or live in our communities that are going to get dropped in the dirt. How much time do I have? Okay. When I was in grants, it was my first economic development job in '83, and I got actually the uranium industry had collapsed, and they'd hired 2 economic developers who both quit after a couple of weeks. So they were desperate, and I got hired. I had never done the job before. I was pretty sure I could do it, but the first night that I was there, I went to the store, and the grocery store on Low Canyon Drive, which is right across from the office they had. It was in the strip center. And I'm in the checkout stand, and there's a woman in front of me with 2 little kids, and she's getting food stamps out, and the cashier's pulling stuff out of her bag because she doesn't have enough money. She's embarrassed. The kids are crying, knocking stuff out of the impulse rack, and she's hitting them. And the box boy back in the store yelled, "He's got a bottle!" And store manager's chasing this guy, 6'5", ponytail, black Harley Davidson t-shirt, tiny boots, bolts out the front door into the parking lot. Box boy goes out this side, the store manager, they grab the guy, they bring him in, and it's this woman's husband. And he doesn't have a bottle, he has pork chops. This is under his shirt. And by the time they get him over to where I am, and he's crying. And of course his wife is crying, the cashier is crying, the box boy tearing up. And I'm just thinking, the store manager says, "Oh, get out of here." He gives them the pork chops, says, "Get out of here, don't do this again." And she's ringing my stuff up, and I'm looking out the window of the store at my office thinking, what have I done? I'm the only guy in this town whose job it is to fix this. And we got 6 companies to move to grants. I'm still not sure how that happened, but it was 3 years later. I'm in the same store. I'm back in an aisle behind the same cash register. And about halfway down the aisle, this woman comes up to me and says, "Are you Mr. Lautman?" I said, "Yeah, I am." She says, "Well, I have. I want to thank you. You saved my family." I thought, "You're kidding me? How's that? How'd that happen?" And she's shaking hands with me, and then pretty soon she's shaking hands with both hands, then she's hugging me. It was longer, it goes past the 3-minute awkward. She's in the grocery store, and again, I'm looking out at my office, right down and she tells me that her husband had lost his job at the mill, at the homestake mill, and had started drinking again. And they'd gotten behind on their house, they'd lost the truck. They had 2 boys, one in junior high, one in high school, like a junior high school, sophomore high school. And they were both good students and athletes, and everything was going well. And now he's drinking again, and we've lost our truck, and the older boy dropped out of school and is hanging out with bad people. She thinks he might be doing drugs, and the younger one was starting to twist off. And she said, then my husband got a job at Baghdad Plastics, which was the first company we recruited. She said he stopped drinking. We got the car, got the car back, got the house payments worked out. The younger boy won the state science fair, and the older one finished high school, got a wrestling scholarship to Iowa, which is like the best wrestling school in the country. And she said, my family would have disintegrated if you hadn't gotten Baghdad Plastics to come to grants. And from that moment on, I knew that this economic development stuff was really important, and that it's worth investing in trying to make it work. The other reason to care about this is that it's a lot riskier now than it was before '07, because virtually half the communities in the country, in one scenario, half the communities in the country can't grow faster than population. And so where you're invested, where you have your life savings, where your business is invested, where all your friends are, where your kids live, if you live out the next 25 years in a place that's in a death spiral, you're going to have a hard time living the life you expect. So the next place on the cycle is plan. After you believe, think, care, you start planning. Planning, you can't use the same program, same plans that worked before '07. You don't want to abandon them if they're working, but you cannot approach it the same way and expect the same results. And we are entering a period where I think the next 10 years, you are going to see, it hasn't really started yet. It's just beginning now. But you're going to see a complete overhaul of the way communities try to manage their local economies. And it's going to be at the local level. It's not going to be at the state and federal level. It's too much politics. It's too much inertia. It's going to be at the community level. So 3 years ago, we started this thing called the Community Economics Lab, and we had no idea whether we were going to come up with anything or not. We got a bunch of guys from Sandia. Bill Knopf. Bill, where are you? No, Bill Knopf. Hey, Bill. Mr. Chair, our Chief of Staff at Sandia for 13 years, Jerry Jonas, Vipin Gupta, Jason Leversky group. We got a bunch of Sandians, some economic developers, some demographers, some educators, and just started embracing the wickedness of the problem and started trying to find solutions to some of this stuff. And we found some. And we're starting to get pretty excited about it. So, and I'll tell you what the genre is. There's a lot of things, I think, if you're just looking at areas where the university can play a role. I mean, we need a new process for thinking about economic development and taking a diverse group of business leaders or community leaders and taking them through an analysis of the predicament, a listing of potential solutions, vetting of those solutions, and an agreement on prioritizing. That process doesn't exist. And I do a SWOT analysis. You go on a retreat, do a SWOT analysis. Everybody's more confused than they were when they came in. If you've ever been to an economic development retreat, most of them are excruciating to sit through. So we need a new process. We need a new paradigm. We need to redefine economic base theory. You can't measure it now. We're not measuring any of this stuff. You can't prove whether the incentives work or not. So there's lots of work to do to figure out how to populate this graph so your community leaders can see where the movement is on a quarterly basis. So you can tell what's happening. So sociology, business, economics, architecture, communications, all of the academic areas have a role in trying to figure this thing out. And there are going to need to be new business models developed for how you conduct the business of managing your local economy. It's really hard now for AED to earn the same return on investment for the money invested there when they have to kiss twice as many frogs to find a prince as they did before, maybe 5 times as more than they did pre-07. And they have less money because all their traditional funding base has been hammered by the recession. And a lot of them are this far from going out of business, and you really need about 4 times as much money as they were investing before. And so you have this, whenever the degree of difficulty goes up and the resources available go down, usually means the end. But there are a lot of things we can do, and the internet gives you the ability to do marketing and cut costs and do things a different way. And we really haven't applied those to the economic development business. The opportunities are there. And then there's a whole new spectrum of approaches that you could use. And I'll just run down a few of them here. In Farmington, Doug mentioned the guys in Farmington. Farmington's going to lose 3 of the 5 coal-fired power plants. They've lost about 15% of the natural gas industry. The natural gas basin peaked 10 years ago. So unless the Manka shale play plays out, in which case we'll have another little boom, they're looking at a long-term contraction scenario. And so a year and a half ago, they hired us to go up there and basically deliberate a process that looked at who was going to be laid off, what the skill sets were, and what industries use those skill sets. And out of that industry set, which ones could you possibly attract and hold on to in Farmington. And we're done with the planning process, and now we're in the process of trying to socialize the conclusions and get the local economic development group, the chambers, and the college and the other institutions actually buy a new program because they've never recruited before. We are looking at taking the remoteness of Farmington and using that remoteness as an advantage by looking at whether we can bend the cost curves for production. So can we control the cost of energy and push it under what the rest of the world's going to be dealing with because you're sitting on a gas basin? Can we control local food production and lower the cost of food? Can we lower the cost of grid energy? Can we convert the community to low pressure natural gas because we got tons of it? And make this a place where you could convince an employer that I can keep your cost curves below your competition for the next 15 years. In grants, the guys in grants called me up and said, can you go back? We want to start our economic development program. There's 4 guys from the original board 30 years ago. One of them's 94. And I said, look, what do you guys want to do? How many jobs do you want to create? 200? 20? 2,000? He didn't know. Well, and they started arguing with each other about how many people could pass a drug test. And I said, look, instead of doing a labor study, which would cost $50,000, and then tricking somebody into moving to the community and then finding out later that there's not enough people here, why don't we hold a series of town halls and let's get anybody that says they want to work to come in. We'll give them the work keys test that'll certify whether they actually have the wherewithal to do the job or not. And drug test them. And then if there's enough of them, so if there's this many people, what company could you make or would hire this group of people? And then have them elect a couple of representatives, and then we go look for the companies that are most likely to be growing or needing you workers. And let's take you guys elect a couple of representatives, and I'll take you over and introduce them to John Barella and tell him, take these 2 guys to these 6 companies and sell them this cohort of people who are all in one place, have their houses paid off, are certified, can do the work, and we'll figure out the buildings and financing and stuff later. But basically cut to the chase, which is who needs a job and wants a job, and go match go make your site selection process focused on the companies that match the workers. Another program we're doing, we got an EDA grant to do a home-based work strategy. So when we're looking at where can you get economic-based jobs? These jobs in the center of the circle that actually grow the economy. Most of the economic development programs are focused on employers, either finding and recruiting employers, growing the employers you have, or starting up employers. When at Mesa del Sol, we were doing an exercise, we thought after Shot Solar and Fidelity and the studios, that we would have the unemployment rate had gone from 3.8 down to 3.3 before Lehman Brothers weekend, if you remember. And we did a labor study and we realized we were running short of labor in 2, maybe 3 of the 5 industry sectors we had targeted to build Mesa del Sol out. And I thought, well, we're going to have to drop down, instead of doing 1,000 employee footprint deals, we're going to have to drop down to 100, maybe 10. So if you drop down to 10, to get 1,000 jobs, you have to do 10 times as many transactions. You go to 10, and do 100 times the number of transactions. And you have a team, you have a staff, your staff basically scales to the number of transactions, not the number of jobs. And so we were looking at having to change the geometry of the industrial parks and the marketing and the kind of financing we're going to need to start doing smaller and smaller deals. And we inadvertently, we had a dry erase board exercise, and I had a 1 in the 1,000, 100, 10, and it was this compulsive, I guess. I just put a 1 there. And I started looking at the 1 thinking, well, why couldn't we, if someone's working out of their 3rd bedroom office and they're billing client in California, it's economic base. We're bringing money in. Why couldn't we count them? And it was count them against the metric we had at Mesa del Sol for creating, we had to create 400 economic base jobs for every 600 houses we were going to build. Why couldn't we, instead of having to do it all in the industrial park and we had to build heat and cool and design and heat a building for 30 years, finance a building for 30 years, and build all these extra lanes on the freeway to attract employers, what if we could use our residential base to do it too? And so, we found out it's the fastest growing sector of the economic base. It's the most footloose, it's by nature footloose, it's location neutral. So if you're living in Riverside, California, and you do location neutral work, which means you can do it anywhere, and you're living there instead of here, you're an idiot. So the pitch is, it's just like the tourism pitch. And so what does it take now to put a home-based worker, solitary worker strategy on a program footing? Because if it was easy, somebody would be doing it, and no one is doing it. There's anybody in the country doing it yet. So we think we have we think we know all the problems associated. There's two big ones. Really got to figure out how to basically level the transaction costs. So 1,000 jobs, 1,000 transactions. You can't build a big enough back office call center to manage 1,000 transactions that way, the way AED manages an employer. So it's got to be, the energy has to come from the clients themselves. And you can do it now because of social media and some of the technology that's been developed really just recently, just in the last 3 or 4 years. So, but this stuff takes money to get done. We're standing up a pilot right now in Rio Rancho and in the South Valley to kind of start testing how one of these programs would work. But you recruit. You do it the same way you do employers. You recruit home-based workers, high net worth, as long as they're billing somebody out of state, they're growing the economy. Recruit them from out of state. You take the people that are already in your community and not doing anything, and you look at them and you interview them and you figure out what could they be doing. Do they have the DNA to work from home to begin with? And anybody taking an online computer course is probably, and doing it successfully, is probably a good candidate. So why shouldn't we be looking at everybody that's unemployed or underemployed and helping them convert into economic base, home-based workers? And then that's the startup. And then there's a whole bunch of people already, if you look around, probably half the people in this room are economic-based or home-based workers, or doing some of the work at home. And we could probably find some ways to support you, take the administrative burdens off of you so you could bill more work. So instead of only building 100,000 a year, you could be making 200. If you had a geek squad that came around that was supported by the community in the name of economic development and took care of you had a webmaster, accounting, all those things that basically drive everybody out of working for themselves. It's an incubator set. In fact, all you really need to do is take your incubator and just turn the knob on definition of the client to, little 3, 10 employee companies to 0 to 1. Serve people who have no intention of hiring anybody, want to work on their own. Anyway, there's also some really interesting work going on on the P side, on the population side of this. If you are one of these communities, you end up in a scenario like this where your qualified workforce has been used up and you can't attract outside talent enough, you're not growing enough of your own, you have no choice. So in Artesia, New Mexico, where they've got a boom in the oil field again, and they've got a federal training center that's driven up the housing costs, the Walmart's only open one shift. They don't have enough people to open the Walmart for the 2 shifts. And 2,000 people a day commute to Roswell. because there's no housing there. What's going to happen is most communities are going to have to figure out how to mine talent out of their resident unqualified sector. And all of a sudden, the poor, the hard to employ, the people that you just, they didn't try hard enough, they're not in the economy, not my problem. You're going to have to spend a lot more time and money trying to figure out how to mine them and convert them back into qualified workers. So you have some really interesting things going on in New Mexico. One is Innovate, Educate. It started out as a STEMS program. They got a program called New Options, which links employers, workers, and the education and training institutions through a monster portal and using work keys so everybody can find. Right now they're all flying blind. It's a major innovation being funded by a Kellogg grant. The other is a guy named Scott Miller has a think tank that we're merging with called Move the Mountain, and he has a program called Circles where they cocoon hard to employ people who have gone through a process, and they cocoon them with like 3 or 4 people who it's kind of like having 3 or 4 AA sponsors. And all the barriers that people that are in chronic poverty run into that drive them back into poverty are known. And this group is educated on how to take care of this, how to get a person through those problems. And they work with them for 3 years. They get them a job. If their car breaks down, they get them a car. They got daycare problems. They coach them through. Boyfriend gets home from prison. All those problems get solved by a team. And at the end of 3 years, they have an 80% success rate, and their candidates triple their net worth. And Scott just moved to New Mexico. And we're going to stand up a program in the South Valley, one in Rio Rancho, probably one in Farmington. Last one is the ACE School. If you haven't been down to look at what Tony Muffalato is doing, Don, where's Don Power? Hey, Don. Those guys have a breakthrough in the education business down there. They've taken the at-risk kids, mostly of color, and they have taken, I think the average math scores were in the 7th percentile. After a year, they're close to 80. And what it is, it's project-based. It's ACE is architecture, construction, and engineering. And they teach all of the high school curriculum needed for passing the test in New Mexico through actual project work. And if you want to see the newest innovation in high school education, and you can tell by talking to these kids, they're all they've changed the paradigm for educating kids, especially ones that were these are kids that the diagnosis was they weren't going to make it to their senior year. There's just no way where they weren't going to make it to their senior year. So, I want everybody to realize that we do have some wicked problems to deal with, and that if you can negotiate if you can believe for a little bit longer that we have influence over how our economies turn out, and I actually think we ought to be talking about a new discipline in the architecture department called economic architecture. So you decide, you go to work and figure out where all the streets are going to go and where the water's going to drain and what uses ought to be here and there, and why wouldn't we be thinking about what is the economic base? What are the sectors of the economic base that are going to support the economy for that place? It ought to be part of the architecture mix. So at Decker Parrott Sabatini, and Dale was one of the first guys to sign on to our lab project and has housed us. That's what we're trying to do. So we're trying to inject into mixed-use projects. What's the economy under this thing look like? And how do you use it to fortify the business case and the investment scenario for that project? But look, this really is, I wouldn't have said this a year ago. And I know my column's been pretty negative, and most of the times you guys have seen me giving a talk at the Rotary Club or something the last 2 years, it's been all negative. It's because I didn't know whether there was any light at the end of the tunnel. But I really think there are some things we can do. And New Mexico's actually way ahead of the rest of this country on figuring some of this stuff out. And so keep the faith and do what Steve Jobs would do. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Questions of Mark? Comments?
So
I have a question for you, if I can break in here. As to the dependency problem, let's consider, why is it cast in concrete that retirement is 65? That was maybe true in 1935, when the life expectancy was 64. It's well, it's true. And it isn't true today, and it's a requirement of people, say, like the president of the university and the governor and the mayor, to say retirement should be later. Now, as to the education issue, I'm taking a seminar today from 12 to 2 to help prepare me for my next job. I'm not qualified now, and I know that. And so the point is that it's incumbent on the employee and the employer to recognize the need for continuing retraining, re-education. It never ends, and it should continue, or I'll become unqualified. Thank you.
Well, Jerry Eunice, who's been part of this lab exercise from the beginning, actually left Sandia last year, where he was head of the Advanced Concepts Group, and his brother is chief of staff of the neurology department at UNMH. His mother must have been really proud, rocket scientist and brain center. And he's trying to, he's over at the Mind Institute, trying to start a new academic discipline called neurosystems engineering, which is really designed at electrically stimulating our old brains to operate at peak efficiency longer. And I remember when Sarah, my daughter Sarah, got accepted to Pepperdine, we had told our kids that we'd get them into wherever, we'd get them to whatever school they could get into. It was a big mistake. Huge mistake. And so the next one was Megan, who Doug was talking about. Megan's, wants to go to Yale. And so I'm on my fidelity, algorithm for how much do you want to have for retirement every month, and I'm recalibrating, and I left everything open besides how long I have to work. 97. I had to work till I was 97. So right then I told everyone, there's no R. I'm not retiring. I'm not going to be able to. And the problem is, nurses have a really hard time walking the floor of a hospital unit after they're 50 and staying sharp. It starts degrading. Same thing with airline pilots. They're not walking around as much, it's not as hard. But if you're my age, if you're over 60 and you haven't experienced a major drop in your ability to work, come and see me. I want to find out where you're taken. But we can't work as hard, as long, but there are some things in the works that will help us work smarter. But I agree with you. When you look at the list of things you can do to address the problem, one of them is find ways to keep your skilled workforce, the people up in here. So this is a gradient of your most productive worker here, your least productive worker here. And your most productive people are going to leave. So anything you can do to keep the most productive people in your economy on the job, you should do it. So I don't understand this double dipping, the prejudice against double dipping. Somebody goes to the state, gets a big pension, goes back to work. No, they earn the pension, so they're working again. You know, we ought to let them work again. We're going to need to. But a lot of this stuff's really counterintuitive in a recession when there's 14 million people out of work. It's hard to make a case that our biggest problem, our biggest structural problem is we don't have enough workers. We don't have enough qualified workers.
That leads to my question. You're talking about encouraging one-person companies. And I would think a lot of older people who may not want to work quite so hard would be good candidates for that, but they're the least capable with the new technology. Are you working on anything along those lines?
Well, yeah, I mean, if you look at what's happening right now, as people lose their jobs, I mean, a perfect example. After Lehman Brothers weekend took a couple of weeks, they scrubbed my entire business unit at Mesa del Sol. Forest City to shut the whole thing down. And I went home and started a consulting business. Started working out of my house. So there's a lot of people going into solitary home-based work. You know, what you want to do is encourage them to do the kind of work that builds somebody from out of state, so they're economic based. It's just like a job at Intel. It's just like that. So 100 of those people get finding consulting work. And you can read radiology film from home. You can be a writer or an editor. You can do architectural drawings. You can do customer service. There's the number of things, since we started looking at it, the number of things that you can actually do from home in a solitary environment of your home office has exploded. Citibank just shut down the call center and sent everybody home. Look, 750 employees, something like that. So it's the only thing I can see, the only area of the economic development business I can see where the tide or the current is going our direction. And it's out there and there's no competition.
Mark?
I think Harold had his hand up. Yeah.
You closed in a very optimistic manner, and I was curious if you would be willing, in that context, to comment on the assertion in the journal yesterday that we have an immature and ineffective business culture.
Mark, repeat the question.
I ended my talk in an optimistic way. Would I be willing to comment on comments in the journal about us having an immature business culture in New Mexico, and what was the rest of it?
Immature and ineffective.
Immature and ineffective. I don't necessarily agree with that at all. I think it's taken so long for us to just come to grips with the obvious. You know, which is, this thing isn't bouncing back. It isn't going to go back to 07. And it was probably unpatriotic to at least not voice your optimism that it would a year ago or 2 years ago. But it's going to be, maybe it's immature now to say, oh yeah, we just need one more year. Into 2012, we're going to be back. Don't worry about it. But yeah, I mean, I think this is just what happens when, well, there's nobody's got the answer to this stuff. It's a wicked problem. Every time you pull back the onion, there's another problem you haven't thought about. And you just can't get bogged down in, oh, geez, this is never ending, and we're all we're all doomed. At some point, you got to go, okay, this is really bad. It's going to be bad, and now let's devote some time and resources to actually figuring out what parts of it we can actually start turning around. And there are lots of things to do now that you can do. They haven't really seen the light of day because we weren't sure when we were working on this stuff the last 2 years whether any of it was substantive. But we do now, and we know that there's going to be more. Mark. Who's got the microphone?
First of all, your book is really revealing, and anyone in this room, and I'm not getting a piece of the action here, that hasn't read it, needs to read it. I demand it, and it's tough to demand a 23-year-old and a 20-year-old, but both my children to read it because it is true. I'm very sure it's true, and it's scary. My question, Mark, is since the whole paradigm of America not being in number one in everything is now coming true, and that we are just understanding how to spell globalization, and we're part of the world, and the world is part of us. The shift that you've talked about, be it New Mexico or Mississippi or Illinois, shouldn't there be a paradigm shift in our educational system, i.e. that ACE is doing? I think New Mexico is probably ahead of the curve in charter schools, and I think it's the way, in my opinion, America should go, because as most of this room grew up, you're supposed to graduate high school, pick a profession, go to college, be trained for it. That was when most of America could afford to send their kids to college. But today, children are much more independent because we've made them that way. We've allowed them to think that way. Do you think that the direction of charter schools in specific professions, whether it be labor or knowledge or technology, is the way that this country should start thinking more about educating the children?
Yes. I mean, look, the problem is none of the institutions we have are going to, if they stay the way they are now, are going to survive this. I mean, you can look at, you have to integrate. If there's one big systems change everybody has to buy into, it's that you can't do economic development and the preparation of your workforce independently anymore. You know, the education community have developed this, conclusion or belief that it's immoral to train anybody for a specific job. And what's happening is, for example, we have, if UNM produces, if New Mexico needs one anthropologist every 10 years, and we graduate 200, so our educational institutions, from the universities on down to pre-K, haven't adjusted and haven't been able to adapt the way a private sector company can do. You say, oh, this isn't working, let's chuck this, look at those guys are doing that, let's change the model. There's so much bureaucratic inertia that's developed over time that you can't change. You're the new governor and you get a new department of, new secretary for transportation, and and there's like 6 obvious things you want to do. You can't do them. You can't fire anybody. You can't change the budget. There's this lattice work of laws and funding formulas, and you just can't. You don't have the discretion as a manager in the government or in a school system to make those changes. So look, it's going to be painful to watch those institutions get loosened up. Charter schools is one of the ways to do it. But I think by this new year, nobody's going to really be able to hold on to the way things have been done in the past very much longer. Everybody's kind of hoping that there was a V and not an L. And I think you'll start seeing more willingness to change. You're going to see a lot of conflict. You look at what was going on in Wisconsin with them trying to change the union contracts. But so I think we're in for some real turmoil. I think Randy was next.
Well, I have the microphone, so I'm going to be next.
Oh,
Well, I wanted to leave a very important point with this very esteemed audience. One of the things that we have here in New Mexico that many of you may not be aware of, but is the supercomputing complex over at Intel. How many people are aware of it? If I could just hear a show of hands. We have the world's fastest non-federal supercomputer here at Intel in Rio Rancho. This supercomputer was created to help facilitate the transfer of a lot of our retiring supercomputer geniuses here, which is one of the strengths we have in this region that most of us are not even aware of. So what happened after we made that investment a couple years ago and created that supercomputer, Intel created their Energy Research Laboratory. It's the first major non-federal research and development innovation investment that Intel's ever made in New Mexico, and it's on scale with the rest of the world. They're here, that operation is here because of the supercomputer. How many people saw the Larry Barker butcher job on the supercomputer? How many? Not very many? Well, he went to the governor, she was 2 weeks on the job, and he sticks a microphone in her face and says, "Governor, what do you think about the supercomputer?" And she says, "Sell it." You know, sell the jet, sell the supercomputer. Those were Bill Richardson, you know, fiascos or whatever. Fact of the matter is, if you understand the federal lab budgets, Sandia gets $2 billion a year probably, and about $1 billion of that goes into that supercomputer infrastructure at Sandia. It pays for the people, it pays for the hardware, it pays for the research projects, and those are wicked problems that Sandia is working on. So we have a center in New Mexico that our governor doesn't understand the value of. We need to convince her of that. We need to support the supercomputer and all the things that it can support. Intel is betting its future on this energy market. That's why they're doing it. That's why they're making that major investment. They're shifting their entire, they say that the energy market that they're moving into is going to be bigger than the PC market that they've just serviced. So I think that's a very positive thing we have in New Mexico, and I would urge you guys to support it. Thanks, Mark.
Mark?
One more question. One more question.
Okay. Mark, I wanted to first thank you for being here and helping to keep us informed, as well as Anderson School of Management. This education as employers really helps us not only keep plugged in, but helps us to also raise our game. My concern is, and we're managing consultants as well as professional engineers, and we've never worked so hard to give our work away. All right, we're finding a lot of our clients, although having very stout balance sheets, unable to pay their bills anymore. All right. Yet we're still staying relevant, still staying in their offices, still giving our work away. All right, and we're going to continue to do that. You know, fortunately, we've been blessed to do that, but that's really a concern, and it's a paradigm that's really not addressed here. The unqualified client base, as it were. Have any comment on that?
You don't want Dennis?
Yeah. I'm a community economic development organization based with the city privately. What is the one thing that I do to start doing this? Do I hire an economic demographer? What is the most important thing for an organization that has to find a way to solve this problem? What's the most important thing they do?
What's the most important thing? What's the most important thing you can do if you're an economic development group? Budget 20% of your group's time to just focus on understanding the problem, coming up with new solutions and a process that can get the rest of your group to buy in. But somebody needs to be working on the new part of the program. And it's hard to take that kind of time and budget it away from other things you're doing when the other things you're doing are maybe got near-term potential. But you have to get the people that are creative and can think out of the box and that are willing to drill down on these problems and embrace the wickedness of the problem. They need to be meeting on a regular basis, which is the purpose for the lab. Bill, when's our next?
I think it's next Wednesday, Mark.
26th? Yeah.
I would talk, if I may, I'd suggest that anybody who has ways to look at this, they come and they join Mark, people at the lab, just for the brainstorming that goes on around these new ideas that are indeed fundamental to meeting the challenges that we're faced with. You're right, it's nice to hear you talk and not be Dr. Morgan. I'm glad there are some ideas. But everybody that's interested should think about coming by to Dr. Parrish and join you.
I think it's exciting that someone has thought this deeply, this carefully, about the problem with this kind of knowledge, but has also done it in city after city after city. That's a rare combination. We are very, very pleased, Mark, to have heard from you. Let's give Mark Lautman a big